Go ahead.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Russell,
I'm Ray.
And I'm Dustin.
and we are students at Hawai'i Pacific University in their History 3670, Racism, Violence, and Genocide in Modern World History. So today we're going to talk a little bit about genocide denial, some case studies and some information, and then also why it's important for people to learn about about this specific topic. So starting off, we're going to talk about some of the definitions. So the first thing is the definition of genocide, or the term genocide, was initially created by a Polish Jewish lawyer by the name of Raphael Lemkin in 1944, while he was documenting Nazi policies and procedures that was used throughout the Holocaust and would eventually become known as the Holocaust. And the definition that he came up with is a coordinated plan of different actions aiming at the destruction of essential foundations of the life of national groups with the aim of annihilating the groups themselves. This definition was originally based off of the Armenian genocide, as there was nothing comparable in modern history at the time that Mr. Lemkin was putting this definition together. So fast forward to 1948, during the UN Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of Genocide, they came up with this definition, which is any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy in the whole or in part a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group, including killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, and forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. So one of the things that we discussed while we were in class was that these definitions are rather ambiguous. So there's no specific, there's not a lack of specificity when it comes to these definitions. So what do you guys think about that?
Yeah, so I think that it's probably both a protective measure for those who are being perpetrated against, so the victims, and then also it leaves room for interpretation with the countries that implemented it. So that you don't allow people to get away with genocide, you make it ambiguous and broad so that they are, the perpetrators would be concerned that they were going to get in trouble. Ray, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I definitely think it's the ambiguity of it is kind of a preventative measure for the victims to be able to kind of identify what they went through with genocide. And I definitely think that that's why it's ambiguous, but why it also has certain specifics, like the last point, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. That's like a really specific thing. But you did mention it is one of the acts. So it is meant to cover anything that could be considered a genocide and have those specifics while remaining ambiguous enough to identify with.
And something also too to consider is that when it comes to the origin of this definition and this process, it was there was no real system for this to bring these criminals to justice. So what eventually the UN decides to do is, regarding intervention, if there is a nation that calls out another nation state or another group of committing genocide, they're ultimately responsible for fixing the problem or resolving the issue. However, the international community becomes responsible for trying them and sentencing them, but it's something that's also kind of an interesting point. So when it comes to intervention, right, we'll notice that there aren't a lot of people that, or not a lot of countries that want to do that, from my observation.
Yeah, it would be great if more countries operated based off of ideals instead of realpolitik or practical measures, and then we would likely have uh, a more successful system to prevent genocide.
I think a lot of countries are really caught up in their own well-being, and they know that by acknowledging a genocide that's occurring, they also almost give themselves an obligation to intervene, and that does mean sometimes economic relief, which could potentially harm the country that's acknowledging it. So I would totally agree that I think a lot of people have their own interests, or a lot of countries have their own interests in mind instead of which would ideally be helping other countries in the middle of a genocide.
Right. So now that we've covered the definitions of what a genocide is, um, now we can move on to defining what genocide denial would be. Ray, did you want to pick that up?
Yeah, sure. I think that genocide denial, it's an act of deliberately rewriting the event of a genocide. And I think that genocide denial really exists on a spectrum. So it can go from entirely dismissing the genocide entirely, saying it didn't happen, to minimizing it, even rewriting certain events of the genocide. One thing I remember is some Holocaust deniers specifically, they said that the chemical Nazis used in concentration camps, it was meant to delouse the victims and delouse Holocaust prisoners, which is obviously not true. And I would definitely consider that an act of genocide denial or genocide minimization as well.
Yeah, so I think a good example of this is probably the French government and the Roman Catholic hierarchy, and both of them participated supporting the Hutu power movement in Rwanda, and following the Rwandan genocide, neither of them would apologize or accept responsibility in the genocide. And I think what that does is it sets up a precedence for the French people, those involved in the French government. And this is way after the fact, so it's 2020 now. But what it does is it sets a precedence for Holocaust denial, genocide denial. And that's dangerous.
Yes, I'm actually going to go on and cover the consequences of genocide denial and its potential repercussions in society. So in my mind, the consequences of genocide denial, it's kind of divided into three sections, which is the effect it has on the victims, the effect it has on the perpetrators, and the effect it has on the bystanders. So first on the victims, I think this is the group that suffers the most. Victims kind of find that the acknowledgement of genocide is almost therapeutic. By expressing their own experience, by confronting the genocide, they're able to emotionally address the trauma they went through, and by experiencing societal acknowledgement of it, by hearing everybody spread awareness and talking about it, they're able to find some semblance of justice. And that kind of support, that kind of therapeutic reaction can help them move on and continue with their lives. They also kind of become empowered by hearing how society reacts to their experience to share it to other people. And there's this really great quote I found in Memories of Mass Repression, Narrating Life Stories in the Aftermath of Atrocity, which is kind of talking about how helpful it can be for a victim to explain what they went through. And that is, sometimes resulting in the narrator feeling a little better and the listener a little worse. Which is just to say that even though it is kind of hard to hear about the genocide, sometimes it is an incredibly important thing. I'm going to move on to the perpetrators. Genocide denial, it rewards the perpetrators of the genocide. It rewrites history so that they aren't seen as really the villains of the story. It also kind of results in a narrative that recasts the entire society as the victims. And an example I would use for that is in 1940s, a lot of people think Germany, all Germans were Nazis. All Germans were the perpetrators of the Holocaust, when in reality, a lot of Germans were victims and a lot of Germans were perpetrators and bystanders. And so it just kind of, it further victimizes the victims, even the victims who survived the genocide. And the last group, the bystanders, I personally think this is the group that is the most dangerous when it comes to genocide denial, because they're most easily influenced. You can't really say to a victim or to a perpetrator of genocide that what they went through wasn't real. They were there, but bystanders, I think they're able to be most influenced by outside perspectives, outside education. And I want to mention that genocides, it's an incredibly diverse phenomenon. It transcends cultures, societies, continents, and it targets quite a few groups. So it targets ethnicities, nationalities, races, religions, and it's something that none of us are exempt from, but through the act of genocide denial, a lot of us feel almost removed from the reality of genocide. They feel as if it could happen in the past, or this minimized version of the genocide could happen in the past, but it can't happen to them. And it kind of makes us distanced from the perpetrators, and it makes us feel as if something like a genocide couldn't happen here, but they also couldn't become victims, they couldn't become bystanders, and they can't become perpetrators, which I think is really important to understand, that anyone could become a perpetrator, and that all we really need for a genocide to spiral out of control is almost a recipe for it, is a diverse society, and then allowance of discrimination. A society, a government that encourages a sense of discrimination in this diverse society. From there, genocide kind of spirals out of control. And I think that by genocide denial, we kind of feel removed from that possibility, from the very real possibility that it could happen here. Do you guys have any comments, any examples, ideas of genocide denial and its effects?
Yeah, so kind of going back to what Dustin was saying with the example of the Rwandan genocide, right? You see in the modern era, the president of Rwanda is working on, or still in power. He was the individual that led the initial movement to retake or to bring back the Tutsi from exile. So you see that some of his policies now in the modern era are the suppression of speaking on ethnicity and other things, that ethnic tensions that existed during the time of the genocide. So as he tries to push for his attempts to make Rwanda the Singapore of Africa, right? You kind of have to wonder: do the ends justify the means by genocide denial? Do we just completely forget that this was part of the history of the country? And then even you have things coming out such as this article from Journal of Genocide Research titled "Is It Always Good to Talk?" The paradoxes of truth-telling by Rwandan youth born of rape committed during the genocide. So essentially what it is you have these group of this generation of children that are products of the genocide. Again, um, one of the actions committed during the Rwandan genocide was mass rape. So again, these women are getting pregnant and these children are are coming into the world, and they have to, if they're actually told, they have to live with the fact that they're a product of rape, they're a product of genocide, and that's that's got to be rough for a child to have to deal with, or anyone to have to deal with.
Most definitely. I think one of the ways we combat that is, being aware of genocide and genocidal denial. And I think, we can start by analyzing our content, analyzing propaganda. What's the difference between fact, fiction, and propaganda? Something in between. So you need to analyze your content. You need to look at the information. Is it a blog? Is it an academic source? Who are your sources? Does it have citations? Is this an advertisement? Be on the lookout for quote unquote false prophets, someone who's trying to rewrite history, and really dive into somebody's credentials. Are they an academic? Are they a part of the media? Are they Joe Bag of Donuts? Can they produce accurate credentials? Who's the publisher of this content? Is the website backed by, is it funded by anonymous donors? One tactic that genocide deniers have turned to is encouraging academics, newly minted PhDs, and others to come and speak on genocide at their conventions, and they're recording them, and then they're splicing that audio to make them sound as if they are supporters of the genocide or are also genocide deniers. And you really need to be on the lookout for that. One other way that you can be on the lookout for that is to be on the lookout for genocide itself. In the modern day, in the day of information, we have millions of websites and information at our fingertips. And I'm going to pull this up here real quick. So we've got this website called Genocide Watch. You can go to genocidewatch.com, and on it they have all types of information highlighting possible genocidal acts that are happening right now, genocide that is being enacted, and countries where we should be on the watch. So if you go to their About Us, their mission statement, Genocide Watch exists to predict, prevent, stop, and punish genocide and other forms of mass murder. We seek to raise awareness and influence public policy concerning potential and actual genocide. Our purpose is to build an international movement to prevent and stop genocide. These guys are on the front lines of combating genocide and genocidal denial, and they do it with a 10-stage process. So if you click on the 10 stages of genocide, you can go down, and their first steps is classification. So they look to classify what's happening. The symbolization, what's being used against the people. Is it propaganda? What's really at the front of that? Discrimination. How are they discriminating against the people? How are they dehumanizing them? How are they organized? Are they organized in a militant organization? Is this smaller groups, religious groups? How are they, polarizing the situation? How are they preparing to commit the genocide? And then persecution, extermination, and then denial. How is the genocide being carried out? And then at the very end, denial. How is it being denied? You can check out this website. Like I said, they really are at the front lines of this, and I think it would behoove us all to pay attention. Next, you can go to the United Nations Prevention tab on their website, and they set forth a framework of analysis to help you identify the main risk factors for genocide. And they also provide the UN resolutions that classify the crimes and the various, I guess you would call them, measures in place to prevent genocide. And I think that like I said, these are two really great websites, and I think that they're a useful tool to help prevent genocide.
There are some really good websites out there to use to, inform yourself and better educate yourself on genocides. But there are, as Dustin mentioned, some really sneaky ones that try and trick people. So you do have to, check credentials and make sure that you're on a trustworthy website. And something else I want to mention is this really good quote from a survivor of the Holocaust who actually explained that she said, "There is no justifiable or allowable amount of racism in any country." And by that, of course, she means, the general discrimination umbrella. There's no certain level in which discrimination should be allowed in society because nobody knows when it's going to take off and become the next genocide. And she explains how she goes from school to school to provide her own experience as a Holocaust survivor, and how she's always asked the question, could something like this happen here? And she always had answered, no in the past few years. And just recently she's begun saying, yes, it is possible that something like the Holocaust, something like a genocide could occur in America. And so, like Dustin said, an important part of genocide prevention is just educating yourself, keeping up to date with politics, finding good sources, and really carrying them through.
And it's also important too, because even though this is a very, very tough subject to talk about, and definitely when we go into class, it's all smiles and jokes at the beginning, and sitting through, it's rough because every week we're learning about just throughout history how humans have just been awful to each other. It's different meticulous processes and systems and plans that are laid out by perpetrators and executed against victims, with bystanders either ignoring it and being ignorant of the fact that the genocide is occurring, or just simply the group finding out too late or not being able to do anything about it. And after the fact is always unfortunate, because it's too late. You can't do anything about it. And of course, there's trials. You can prosecute the individuals and bring them to justice, but there's again no actual, you're not going to bring back those who were killed. So again, it is a hard subject. It is something rough to talk about, but it's something that needs to be said. The education and knowledge needs to be spread.
And Russell, as you mentioned, when you're learning about a historic genocide, something that occurred in the past, there's nothing you can do about it except for educate yourself and spread awareness of it. So with that being said, I'm going to bring awareness to the fact that we're recording this in April, which is officially Genocide Awareness Month. And according to the Holocaust and Human Rights Education Center, April has been officially dubbed the Genocide Awareness Month because many genocides started in April. And so it's just a month to spread awareness, bring education, and do what we can for genocides that have occurred in the past and for genocides that may occur in the future. That website, the Holocaust and Human Rights Education Center, is actually hosting a student competition from grades 7 to 12. And it's just to bring awareness of 20th and 21st century genocides. Submissions are due April 30th if anybody wants to join. And you just enter in some original form that brings awareness to genocide or even genocide denial.
Awesome. All right, everyone. So we appreciate you tuning into our podcast. Please educate yourself. You know, again, like we said, talk about it. There's a bunch of resources out there. And want to thank you for again, tuning in and listening, and share this with everyone. Give us feedback on if there's anything that we missed, or, you know, there's your opinions on it. And yeah, thanks again. Be safe, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.